About a year ago, February, scientists from across the country were alerting us that they were concerned about the abuse of science in a number of key federal agencies.
Kevin Knobloch is the president of the Union of Concerned Scientists, an advocacy group that has been monitoring what it calls the misuse of science by the Bush administration.
Scientists in the federal agencies who are supported by our tax dollars are among the best in the world, doing the best science that they can do. As that science comes up the chain to the political appointees in a number of these agencies, it is being rewritten and altered.
This administration is impeding the flow of honest scientific communication.
Rick Piltz says he's seen it firsthand. For the past decade, he's edited reports on global warming for the U.S. Climate Change Science Program.
Through suppressing information, through distorting information, this administration is misinforming the public about the nature of the climate change problem.
There's a growing body of evidence that temperatures are rising, glaciers melting, and oceans warming. Just last month, the National Academies of Sciences from 11 countries said the threat of climate change is clear and increasing and called for prompt action. Yet at the G8 summit this month, President Bush again rejected the call for setting mandatory limits on carbon emissions. The administration's consistent position has been more study is needed.
We want to know more about it. It's easier to solve a problem when you know a lot about it. And if you look at the statistics, you'll find the United States has taken the lead.
The science is great, but they don't use it. They'll point to how much money they spend on it. But when it gives them a message that doesn't fit with their political preconceptions, they turn away from it.
Piltz says the administration would alter government reports when scientific findings didn't conform to the White House position on climate change.
If the document was already out, they would suppress further references to it. If it had to go through them, they would manipulate it. If they didn't like what it said, they would ignore it.
In Piltz's case, global warming reports from his office went to the White House Council on Environmental Quality, which crafts administration policies on the environment. Those reports were altered by the Council Chief of Staff, Phil Cooney. Before coming to the White House, Cooney worked as a lobbyist for the oil industry. He had been the climate team leader at the industry's main trade group, the American Petroleum Institute.
The fox guarding the hen house aspect of it was so blatant. I mean, you had somebody who was essentially an oil industry lobbyist who now is the White House environmental policy maven.
Piltz says that Cooney's changes on behalf of the White House were part of a pattern to exaggerate the uncertainty about global warming and its impacts. For example, Piltz cites this draft of a 2003 report to Congress. The original version says, "The Earth is undergoing a period of relatively rapid change." Cooney changes it to a more tentative, "may be undergoing a period of rapid change."
So this relatively innocuous-looking edit change, you're saying, is a really big deal.
It is when you do it over and over and over again on all communications about the issue.
Which is what Piltz said happened in report after report.
He's crossed out shown that, crossed out confirmed that, he's crossed out demonstrated.
And then there's this draft of another report to Congress. Text written by the science program says warming will also cause reductions in mountain glaciers, and goes on. Cooney crosses it all out.
It's deleted with the comment, straying from research strategy into speculative findings and musings here.
I mean, I have to tell you, I write books. I get edited all the time. I get manuscripts back that are marked up as well. I mean, isn't this what the guy's supposed to do?
Well, what is an oil industry lobbyist doing coming in on a science program document and taking out stuff that is being taken out, to me, it seems, because it conveys a way of talking and thinking about the subject that just doesn't suit the White House politically.
It's CEQ's job, the Council on Environmental Quality, to make sure that these reports represent what the administration has actually done and what the administration's position is.
Myron Ebell is the Director of Global Climate Policy at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a public policy organization that gets part of its funding from ExxonMobil. Ebell defends the editing work that Cooney did.
It seems to me that what Phil Cooney did was exactly what his job required of him, and he did it in a totally appropriate way.
He is a non-scientist, and he was not simply editing a policy statement, he was going in and altering the conclusions of scientific analysis to mean something quite different than what the scientists meant to say.
Ebell says it's right to question the results of government-funded science because scientists have an interest in holding on to their funding.
Elected office holders are often expected to take what scientists say at face value, as if, the oracle has spoken. But it isn't always the case. I mean, scientists have self-interested motives. They're not always right.
I mean, scientific integrity should have bipartisan support. But I don't know, because global warming is now so politicized, it's almost part of the culture war.
Rick Piltz had enough of that war. In March, he quit his job.
It was undermining the credibility and the integrity of the program, and it became just an impossible environment to work in, and I finally just one day said, that's it.
His story and the news of Phil Cooney's edits hit the front page of the New York Times last month. Just 2 days later, Cooney quit his job too. He left the White House for ExxonMobil.
This is a poster child case for the revolving door. Philip Cooney came from the American Petroleum Institute to be the chief of staff at the leading White House agency responsible for protecting the environment and the public health, the health of Americans.
It should come as no surprise that the Bush administration, which is not very sympathetic to most of the positions of the major environmental groups, has looked to fill their positions from people who have relevant expertise from companies and trade associations and places like that. They have to come from somewhere.
Phil Cooney, who begins his job at Exxon in the fall, did not respond to our request for an interview. The White House would say only this.
We wish him well. We appreciate his service. Go ahead.
Administration officials maintain that the climate program reports were scientifically sound. In fact, the program director, a scientist, signed off on them. As for those controversial grazing rules, despite the warnings of scientists about harm to land and wildlife, the BLM went in a different direction. It's adopting changes that actually make it harder to restrict grazing on America's public lands.
I think the American public need to hear what's happening to their public lands. That's their public lands. You've got 300 million people, and it's their public lands.
I don't like the fact that the science, the work that my peers and my mentors, the folks I worked with from the Forest Service 35, 40 years ago that most of them the good Lord's taken, and the people that are still working, all that we've done to try to improve the plight of the public lands is backsliding.
Does this topic of science meets politics catch your interest? If so, you might want to apply for some consulting work over at the Environmental Protection Agency. The New York Times got a hold of an EPA proposal to hire outside PR experts. The job, in part, to edit